Hey everyone, and welcome back to Above the Tree Line, where we answer your questions about faith, Christianity, and culture. We are joined today, as usual, by ACF Senior Pastor.
Hi, friends.
I didn't even say your name.
My name is Will Davis Jr.
Will Davis Jr.
Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
World-renowned author,
That's it.
pastor.
Yes. International author here in Mexico.
So, yes. So we actually have a question that just came in, and it kind of piqued my curiosity because this is not something that we've talked about before. And this is pertaining predominantly to, not predominantly, but in regards to young adults in the workplace.
I love it.
So the question that
Thanks
we
for
have
asking.
is, it may be interesting for us to have a discussion about Christianity in the workplace. For young adults, it can be helpful to see practical ways of workplace discipleship. Okay, so what this person is talking about, I'm inferring, is Christians who are in the workplace, but they're not in ministry. They're in the marketplace doing an array of jobs. And the question arose, how should they talk about or not talk about their faith in the workplace? So first thing I want to start off with is, there's that phrase about if Christians are going to share their faith, only use words if necessary.
Yeah, use
something
words
to
only if you
that
have
effect.
to. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I butchered that. So should Christians be outspoken about their faith in the private marketplace? Do you think there's a place for that?
First of all, I don't know when this is going to air, but today's your 15th wedding anniversary.
Yes, it
We're
is.
celebrating it here in the office. Way to go, Lauren.
Are we celebrating it here?
No, well, you don't.
No.
You're still working, but you just told us, and we're very happy for you. So 15 years of happy anniversary to Lauren and Matt. The workplace is, first of all, let's blow up some theories. Okay, let's blow. There's no such thing as secular and sacred.
Okay.
There's no secular doesn't exist.
How do you figure?
If everything you do as a Christian is sacred.
Okay.
Work is sacred. Play is sacred. Rest is sacred. So this person says they're not in ministry. They're a holy and royal priest. And they offer sacrifices and gifts to God. And they offer ministry to the world in Jesus' name. So they're doing ministry. They just may not be doing it in a church or getting paid to do it. They're getting paid for produce a product or lead a team or whatever. But to this wonderful young adult, you're very much in ministry because you're a priest of the King and you represent him everywhere you go, including work.
It is kind of interesting, though, because Jesus had a marketplace job.
Jesus had a
was a
marketplace
carpenter.
job. He was in a marketplace.
So,
Yep, he was.
but I am kind of curious. We don't know a lot about how he conducted himself as he was making furniture and selling it to people.
He didn't have to give a warranty.
Right.
It's going to work. This chair is going to work.
So do you, that I am kind of curious now, what would Jesus say to people who came and bought furniture from him? Would he talk about his father or would he talk about the piece of furniture?
I think he probably talked about the piece of furniture because he didn't really launch that whole ministry thing until after he was baptized at age 30 in the movement of John the Baptist. So I think he was on a holding, we're digressing, but he was probably in a holding pattern, learning who he was, establishing his identity, figuring out his mission, and it really launches officially with the baptism from John the Baptist. So I think he was a great carpenter and was a very popular guy in town and was very reputable and took care of his mama and his sisters and his brothers, and then launched.
I think it's safe to say that he produced an amazing product.
We can say that.
He put all of his effort into just working with excellence. I think he treated his customers with honor. And those are all practices we can do, not only in ministry, but in the workplace. So I guess some people are I'll say I was in the marketplace for a long time.
You were in the real marketplace.
I was in government.
You were up to your ears.
And we talked kind of surface level. I mean, we're in Texas. Texas is a pretty conservative state, pretty Christian state-ish, I would say.
Yes.
And so in the Capitol, we would talk about God, especially as it pertains to your political platform. But I did feel like there was always some hesitancy on my end to really talk a lot about my faith because it almost feels like that's one of those things that you shouldn't bring up in the business place sometimes. You're just looking at me.
No, I'm listening.
I remember there was one time that I did want to tell a girl about Jesus, but I was scared I was going to get fired.
And that's a risk. That's a real risk
Yeah.
in
So
some places.
I mean, is that a risk that we should be taking?
So discernment, all things are permissible, not
Not
all
all
things
things
are
are
beneficial.
beneficial.
Thank you. Discernment is a real big one. So if you're low on the totem pole and you're new, you might want to talk without words, like witness by your example. I've been in ministry all my life. Have had a couple of jobs in the marketplace on summers or whatever, construction, and sold sporting goods for a year, et cetera. And I try to lead with my example and let words come only if necessary.
So what does that mean, though?
Be the best employee they have. I mean, I think Christians should be the best employees people
Work
have.
hard, be
Excellence,
respectful.
work hard, be respectful, do more than go the second mile, do more than what's asked. I clocked out of I sold suits for a long month of my life when I was living in Fort Worth. Before I got the church in Fort Worth, I sold suits at Dillard's, which was a nightmare.
Wow.
But I remember clocking out one day to go home, and all of a sudden they're shorthanded, and so I worked another 4 hours and didn't ever clock back in, and didn't worry about it. That's the kind of employee I think Christians should be. You just do whatever it takes. Just lead well, be an example. But the witnessing piece, I'm working with a company right now. I'm consulting with a for-profit, and the leader, the CEO, is an overt Christian. So he's got permission to kind of take that thing. And most of the people he's hired, not all, are Christians. So it's kind of assumed. But if you're the low end of the totem pole and you're brand new, you probably want to just honor the culture until you get the right to. I think you have to earn the right to speak into it.
So
And
invest in relationships.
Invest in relationships, and maybe one day in 6 months over coffee, somebody's like, my marriage is really going south, and you're like, can I pray for you? But I think you have to earn that right. So yes, be an example. But again, I love what you said at the top, Lauren. Don't use words unless you absolutely have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
That's what I recommend, and just be a great employee, and they'll see it in you.
Yeah, I mean, it's because those characteristics are attractive to people. Like they're like,
Yep.
okay, why is it that you're so kind? Especially in marketplace where a lot of people cut corners. Sometimes maybe they make unethical decisions. You're set apart if you don't do those things. If you're honest, if you're kind,
Yeah.
if you honor other people. And I think that those traits are attractive, and then people will kind of begin to wonder, like, well, why are you this way? And once you have that platform for relationship, at that point, if you feel comfortable, you can tell them why you are the way that you are. But I used to kind of just try to like sprinkle it in on people just to see how they would react. Because if I'm like, you know what, I'll be praying for you, I would just
Yeah.
say something like that,
Yeah.
just to be like, here's a hint, like I'm a Christian, like I'm going to be praying for you. And usually you could tell if like how they would respond if they were open to that or.
So there are Christians everywhere. That's what you've got to note, this wonderful young person who wrote in. You're probably not the only Christian in your office. They may be quiet and they may be intimidated, or maybe they just don't talk about it at work. But they're Christians, Lauren, as you well know, on every street corner, in every cul-de-sac, in every school, in every business, in every military unit, and they're everywhere. And they tend to find each other.
Yeah.
So if you're new into the marketplace world, be patient. You don't have to evangelize it. You're not being a bad Christian if you're not witnessing every day at work. Let me take that pressure off.
Okay.
You're not being a bad Christian if you're biding your time and just trying to do an honorable job, because work by itself is sacred. You don't have to witness to make it sacred. Work's just sacred. Doing a good job matters. That's all over Ecclesiastes. So just be a great employee and honor God and pray for opportunities, but be very wise and discerning, because you don't want to blow that culture up. It's not your
Right.
job.
Right.
It's not your job. Just
Well, that's fair.
do your job and see what God says as it goes.
So it's interesting. This person is asking about workplace discipleship, and so far we've talked primarily about like workplace evangelism.
Yep.
And I will say there are some styles and tactics in evangelism that can like shut relationships down.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never done
Like,
that.
I
I've been so rude. I've been so rude.
I remember like sometimes going to the store with a family member, and if somebody was checking us out at the cash register, a certain member in my family would be like, "Do you know Jesus?" And they would say like, "Well, no, ma'am, I'm, whatever, Hindu, Muslim." And she'd be like, "Well, if you don't know Jesus, you're going to go to hell."
Oh, no, don't.
And
That's just not.
so that would be her
God loves
form.
you,
And then
but-
we would walk out of the store and she would say, "See what I just did there?
Yeah,
Like,
you're like,
I'm
yeah, I
telling
do. I do
people
see what you
about
just did there.
Jesus. So there is a way to be really
What part of pagan
abrasive.
swine do you not understand?
There is a way to be really abrasive, but with your faith. And I think there's also a hesitancy in culture, especially the church right now doesn't have the best reputation. Over the years, we have kind of done ourselves a disservice by being known for what we stand against. So a lot of people think of Christians as being like judgmental, not taking care of the poor. Like there's all these different
Yeah.
stigmas, and
Yeah.
so is there, like, we shouldn't be scared of that though. We shouldn't be scared to be disliked because of our faith.
I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, Romans 1:16. Paul said this, it is the power of God to salvation. And I do think we're living in a culture, a Christian culture today, Lauren, where either one or two things has happened, or both. We are ashamed of the gospel. We don't like the risk it brings of having to be Jesus-centered people, or we've lost confidence in its power. Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God. And I'm not convinced we've kind of acquiesced on behaviors and lifestyles that Jesus completely has the power to set free and turn. And we don't lead back with Jesus. We just go, oh, okay, just live that way. And Paul would say, no, that's a thing Jesus can heal and fix. So we shouldn't be ashamed. You don't want to be aggressive. You don't want to be rude, but you don't want to be a pushover either, because there's a lot of stuff being spewed out there. And I like to say here at ACF, drop a J-bomb.
J-bomb.
Drop a J-bomb into a conversation, and just because there's power in that name, and if you are a believer, we shouldn't be ashamed to bring him into
Yeah.
meaningful conversations.
Yeah. I dropped a J-bomb the other day in a group conversation and walked off, and I was like shaking. I was so nervous how it was going to be received.
You know what? There's power there.
Yeah. So then let's talk about workplace discipleship. So does discipleship have a role in the private marketplace?
There's a couple forms of discipleship. There's formal and informal. And I think informal discipleship, 100%, if it's along relational lines and you identify other Christians in the setting, and it's iron sharpening iron, and you're praying for each other, or you get permission over lunch to hang out together and maybe pray or study the word or whatever, or you're just encouraging each other, but you're not getting paid to do discipleship.
Right.
Your boss is paying you to
Right.
make widgets
And
or whatever.
I would even assert that if you are using paid company time for discipleship,
Unless you have permission.
yeah, unless you have permission, it's somewhat
Yeah,
dishonest
it's not what
because
you're there
you're
for.
taking money for something that you weren't hired for.
I'm 100% a fan of marketplace Christianity. I think that we as Christians have to close the gap between what we think marketplace is and what we think church is and everything else. This shouldn't be a hole at all. But if you're a paid employee, discipleship's not why you're there.
Right.
It being an example of Jesus is, being salt and light is. But unless you get permission, which is great, and I've led them, lunchtime Bible studies. I've led a Bible study on Zoom in the morning for employees that was optional. If you get permission to do that kind of stuff, that's great. But I do think that the more informal form is better, unless you really get permission to have a Bible study over lunch or whatever. Just love on people, scatter prayer requests, I'll pray for you, like you just said. You don't want them to see you coming and want to run away.
Right.
Unless there's Christians and you guys are in agreement, but you just don't want to be, oh gosh, here he comes. He's going to want to pray for me. Just tone it down and pray for favor.
Yeah.
Be the best, be Joseph and for Pharaoh, be the best employee in the kingdom. That's your witness, in my opinion.
So what if should you always be a really good employee, even if the person that you're working for is maybe not making the most
What did Paul
honest
tell
decisions?
slaves?
What did Paul tell
In
slaves?
Ephesians 5, honor your masters.
Yeah.
Because you're not serving the master, you're serving me. So even if you have a thug as a master and he's a terrible guy and he's beating you and he's not a good man, you honor that master because he's an authority over you, and I will deal with him because you're not serving him, you're serving me. Paul told slaves that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think you got a bad boss, you honor your boss, or you don't work there anymore. Just if you can't honor him, leave.
Yeah.
But don't be dishonoring, don't be subversive. That's darkness stuff.
Yeah.
Be the best employee. Don't spread the gossip. Don't spread the rumors. do your best job, because you're not serving ultimately that company, you're serving Jesus. And excellence matters to Jesus. Even if you're painting a wall,
Yeah.
if you're printing stuff, if you're doing dry cleaning, if you're mowing yards, do it for Jesus. It matters.
It is interesting because, even when I've been a Christian for most of my life, but even when I worked in the Capitol, I felt this draw. I was like, man, I'm a Christian. I really should be doing ministry. And I had a call on my life for that. But the marketplace needs Christians. We
Yeah.
need Christians in
Yeah.
our hospitals. We need Christians in our schools. Not every Christian needs to go into ministry, because then all the Christians would be in the church.
Well,
and then
you
the
and I
rest,
would be out of work, first of all, because they'll take our
Right.
they'll take our jobs.
Right.
So stay
They'd
where
do
you
it a
are,
lot better.
please. All you talented people, stay where you are.
But then, like, all the rest of the world would not have Christians. And I'm like, I would like to know that the person who's operating on me or my child is led by Christ.
I had my shoulder replaced recently and went to a really well-known doc here in town and he prayed over me twice. And once in an exam and once before surgery. He just said, Lord, guide my hands, give me wisdom, help will to rest, it was great. And
Are doctors allowed to do that?
it's his practice. He can do whatever he wants to do.
So, here's my other question. Could he, if you rejected that, could he be opening himself up to lawsuit?
No, he can say no. He's had people say no. He says, do you mind if I pray for you? And they say no. He says, okay, we're going to do it. But it's on his website. I will offer to pray for you in practice.
And there's no
He leads with
legal
It's a
complications of
private
that.
practice. So he can do it. But your point is well made. A lot of people think the next true spiritual awakening is going to be birthed in the marketplace and not in the church. That the church right now is under such suspect for being too political or whatever, suspicion, that where the wind of God's going to start blowing next is in hot-hearted Christians in the very kind of places you're talking about. They're loving Jesus and taking a stand and being godly, and that's going to where the wind of God's going to blow next. Maybe not in the church, which fascinates me. And that's why I'm trying to invest some of my time right now in marketplace leaders, because they're out there fighting it every day.
Yeah. And it's easy for me now to talk about my faith because I work for a church. People know I'm a pastor. But I will say, in the career path I was in leading up to this, it was not easy
Give us
for
30
me.
seconds. Not everybody knows what you did. Give us 30 seconds on that, because I think it's important people know.
So originally I was on the track to go to law school, and my goal was to run for the Texas State Senate. So I spent a lot of time working for governors, lieutenant governors, both in Texas and in California. And I was a speechwriter and a press secretary. Had a lot of relationships with higher up people who were making important decisions.
You were in pretty elite thin air.
Yes. Yes.
So and you were young and you were female and you were a Christian.
Yes. And I wore very high heels so I could be taller than all the men.
High heels and
Yes.
people heard you coming a mile away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Clack, clack, clack.
Clack, clack,
But
clack.
it was, I always worked for people who would talk about their faith in their speeches. So like when I was writing a speech, I could drop in scripture. So it wasn't forbidden, but there were a lot of non-believers working in the office. And I wondered, as a government employee, would there be repercussions if I made somebody feel uncomfortable because I was sharing my faith? And the one time I did share my faith in the marketplace, or in the Capitol rather, I cried because I was like, I've known you for years, and I felt so
Wow.
guilty that I've never said the name Jesus to you.
Wow.
And it's such a huge part of my life. And I was like, and I'm sorry if this offends you.
How'd they receive it?
She was moved. She was like, wow, Lauren, thank you so much. She didn't become a Christ follower.
Yeah.
I was kind of bummed. I was like, I messed it up because she didn't she didn't choose to
At that
follow
moment,
my faith
At that moment.
But she was like, thank you for caring about me enough to share this. So that was the one time I did it. But it was funny because that verse in Peter, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and
There you go.
respect.
Yeah. There you go. It's a
So
great word.
sometimes it's hard. I just want to encourage people, always be prepared to give an answer, because I was not prepared, and I just ended up bawling all over myself. And it was just like, Jesus, I don't know. I didn't know how to explain to her why I believed what I believed. So do you have a 30-second snippet on advice for how do you get prepared to give an answer for your faith?
I think, well, read the word, pray for, if you're praying for opportunities, you're going to get them. So I think you read the scriptures, get your heart set right, know what your story is. If you get asked, hey, Why do you believe? Have your 30-second answer of, well, I was raised this way. This is what happened to me. This is who I am now. You can tell that. That's an elevator story. Have that ready to go. I love to ask questions to people. I love, you're wearing a cross. Tell me why you wear a cross. Or what does that fish hook on your wrist mean? Or what's your dad's story? If I see somebody who's kind of hostile, like, tell me about your dad. That may be the most revealing question you can ask a person. And you do get conversation starters. And what I'm trying to do these days is just drop seeds in, trusting that God to work in a process. I may get to bring it home. I may not. But I'm dropping seeds all the time. We're going to baptize a young woman this weekend at our church that I've been dropping seeds in for 4 years. And guess who's getting baptized this weekend? And because the conversation's gotten more and more overt. But when I met her, she was in a crisis. And I just offered to pray for her and tell her I was so sorry and it's going to help her through it. And 4 years later, she's getting in the water this weekend.
Yeah.
Ask questions.
Yeah. Because it's about relationship ultimately.
Let's do a podcast sometime, Lauren, on can you mess up a witness? Can you mess it up so bad that the person's going to get lost and go to hell because you didn't witness
That's
well?
a great question.
The answer
Because
is
I
no.
wonder about that grocery store employee.
I know that
like,
person's gone.
Yeah.
No, let's talk about that sometime.
Okay. I do like the idea. That's the other thing I did at the Capitol. I would wear a very subtle cross, like on my necklace, just to be like, in case anybody wants to know what I believe. Like, I'm not going to offend you, but there it is. Okay. So I don't know if we answered this question or not.
Good stuff.
But I do like that
Be
it's
gentle.
like, be gentle, be honoring,
humble.
work with excellence.
Yeah, be the best employee they have. I mean, if you get a witness and you're a sorry employee, that doesn't mean anything.
I know.
So be the best employee they have.
Yeah.
And witness later.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you to whoever sent this question in. This is awesome. I know that this is something I struggled with, and it didn't even occur to me because I've been out of the marketplace for so long. So I'm glad we were able to revisit this. Thank you for your input
Yes, ma'am.
on
My
this
pleasure.
topic. If you guys have any other questions, and I'm sure you probably do,
Send 'em. We
go
love 'em.
to acfellowship.org/podcast, and we will look forward to seeing you guys
Bye,
next
friends.
week.